Have 9 players selected for the Pro Bowl, but Brandon Aiyuk was a notable omission. In fact, he's a downright snub from the Pro Bowl. Christian McCaffrey was bad last year. Brandon Aiyuk is a bad snub this season. The data points in only one direction. So let's take a look at what it says. The NFC picked 4 Pro Bowl wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb of the Cowboys, A.J. Brown of the Eagles, Puka Nacua of the Rams. He'll be headed into Levi's Stadium this weekend. He's actually going to play. Puka is. He has a chance to break some rookie records. And Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, so let's take a look statistically at the seasons that some of these receivers are having. First, we mentioned CeeDee Lamb. Okay, so we highlighted CeeDee Lamb for you right there. Then we said A.J. Brown. Obviously, Brandon Aiyuk gets highlighted too, since we're going to be talking about him. There's Puka Nacua, and here is Mike Evans. So you look at it from a raw yardage perspective. Okay, CeeDee Lamb, 1,651 yards. I get it. That's a lot of yards. It's just a little bit behind Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's having a historical season, not just through the yardage, but through the efficiency that we'll talk about in a little bit. So you move on. That's one of the spots for CeeDee Lamb. Hard to argue with that. A.J. Brown and Puka Nacua, 1,447 yards and 1,445 yards, respectively. Ahead of Brandon Aiyuk, who had 1,317 yards. But there is a Pro Bowl selection that has even fewer yards than Brandon Aiyuk. It's Mike Evans at 1,233 yards. I'm not as torn up about the Mike Evans selection, though, because what's really important is to consider how many targets and how many receptions it took for each of these receivers to reach their yardage total. So look in this column right here. My mouse is over at the reception column. You can see with A.J. Brown, his 1,447 yards, and Puka Nacua's 1,445 yards, those came on over 100 catches, 105 catches, 101 catches, or put into even more perspective, 157 targets for A.J. Brown and 154 targets for Puka Nacua. Brandon Aiyuk wasn't all that far behind them in yardage, and he only had 72 catches. According to this, 101 targets. If you want to go to the PFF numbers, Brandon Aiyuk had 97 targets. The PFF numbers seem to, I think, exclude throwaways, where Pro Football Reference counts throwaways. So Puka Nacua and A.J. Brown both reached around 1,400 yards with 151 and 147 targets, respectively. Brandon Aiyuk was nearly that with only 97 targets. That's 50 fewer passes to him. 50 fewer passes to Brandon Aiyuk to generate essentially the same amount of yardage. If you want to go by yards per reception, well, here you go. Brandon Aiyuk is at the top of the league, 18.3 yards per reception. Mike Evans, good as well. Evans, though, had fewer total yards than Brandon Aiyuk, and obviously the yards per reception number was not as gaudy. So you can make the very good argument that Brandon Aiyuk should be in there over Mike Evans because his numbers are just better, period, than Mike Evans' numbers. But the raw numbers for Aiyuk are admittedly a little bit short of Puka Nacua and A.J. Brown, but look how far down the list Nacua and A.J. Brown and even CeeDee Lamb are down the explosiveness and the efficiency chart here. Speaking of efficiency, which should matter more than raw yardage, take a look at this. This is yards per route run from Pro Football Focus. This is the stat that matters, I think, the most when we're trying to measure wide receiver effectiveness. Tyreek Hill, this is so every single time you run a route, whether or not you get the ball, that's included in the calculation here. So this is a good measure of how efficient you're being as a wide receiver. Number one in the NFL this year was Tyreek Hill. His yards per route run of 3.85 was an NFL record. Normally, 3 yards per route run is elite. It will lead the league. Tyreek Hill was over 4 yards per route run for most of this season until he got hurt at the end. 3.85, still an NFL record. Ranking second in yards per route run, which means a whole lot more than raw yardage, Brandon Aiyuk at 3.01. Fourth, CeeDee Lamb, 2.79. Down at 7, Puka Nacua, 2.59. And 8th, A.J. Brown, 2.54. Nakua, Brown, CeeDee Lamb, all good seasons in terms of receiving efficiency. Anytime you're above 2.5, you're going to be one of the top 10 most productive receivers in the game. But anytime that you're over 3, as Brandon Aiyuk was here, well, that means that you are absolutely elite. In fact, it was Julio Jones who led the league most years during his prime. Julio Jones would be at like 3.04 yards per route run or 2.96 yards per route run. So what Brandon Aiyuk did this season in terms of a receiving efficiency perspective was essentially what Julio Jones was doing in his prime with the Atlanta Falcons. Was it a little bit overshadowed by how good Tyreek Hill was? Of course. But Tyreek Hill didn't take one of Brandon Aiyuk's spots. Tyreek Hill plays for Miami. Miami is in the AFC. Brandon Aiyuk is in the NFC. The guys who took Brandon Aiyuk's spots are all ranked behind him. CeeDee Lamb, Puka Nacua, A.J. Brown. Hell, I didn't even look up Mike Evans because it was going to be lower than all of those. So that just gives you an idea of the snub level here. Brandon Aiyuk was delivering at top of the league levels, especially top of the conference levels in terms of receiving efficiency. He did essentially what 2 Pro Bowl qualifiers did with 50 fewer targets, and he's not a Pro Bowler this season. So it is a snub. That should explain it to you. Appreciate what Brandon Aiyuk did because it was Julio Jones level efficiency. We're talking prime Julio Jones level efficiency. We're not talking Eagles Julio Jones. He's a shell of his former self. And what happened here this season is going to get Brandon Aiyuk paid a lot of money, and I think by the 49ers, because when you can go for over 1,300 yards with only 97 targets, as we just pointed out, 97 targets, 72 catches, that the 49ers are all about offensive efficiency. Efficiency is so correlated with success and with winning. Raw yardage really isn't, especially compared to that efficiency. The 49ers know that Aiyuk, with the damage that he does in the limited opportunities that he has, he makes the offense click. This is a staggering graphic to help illustrate some of what I'm showing. You could see on the x-axis, raw PFF separation grade. On the y-axis, the yak grade. Look where Brandon Aiyuk is in relation to all the other receivers in the NFL. He's over here. He's on the top right. This was through 9 weeks. I wasn't able to get a more updated one, but I've seen a more updated one. Aiyuk has stayed consistent throughout the entire season. He's at the top right of this graph. He's away from the entire bunch. So how you're trying to explain to me that this guy with the dot way up here is not one of your 4 best receivers in the conference and not one of your 8 best receivers in the league, which is by definition what the Pro Bowl honor is, that's completely beyond me. That this right here shows you what a snub, not including Brandon Aiyuk, was. Speaking of receivers and speaking of Brandon Aiyuk, he and George Kittle became the first 49ers receiving targets since Terrell Owens and Jerry Rice in this season up on the screen, 1998, both notched 1,000 yards simultaneously for the team. So Owens and Rice both went for 1K in 1998. Aiyuk and George Kittle became the first 49ers receiving tandem to do so simultaneously in a season since then. And the reason that I put this up on the screen right now is that 25 years ago today, Terrell Owens made one of the most famous catches in 49ers franchise history. That's right. This is the catch 2 against the Green Bay Packers. It was 25 years ago today at Candlestick Park to beat Green Bay. I wrote an epic long-form piece. It's almost like a book about the 49ers Packers rivalry. And I tweeted it out. You can go check it out on my Twitter. I'll toss it into the description. I wrote this back in 2019. So I wrote this 5 years ago. That was the 20th anniversary. Now it is the 25th anniversary. So we can bring back 49ers Packers memories from Candlestick Park, and ties in nicely to what Brandon Aiyuk has been doing, because it's Aiyuk and Kittle. You had Owens and Rice back in the day. The 49ers could add a third 1,000-yard receiver if Deebo Samuel plays on Sunday and picks up 130 receiving yards. He's just a little bit short. I think he would have gotten it had he not been hurt earlier this season, but that happens in the NFL. You need health to achieve some of these milestones, and we'll see if Deebo Samuel can have a huge game to reach it. All right, that is the gist on Brandon Aiyuk. I just wanted to make it really clear that he was a Pro Bowl snub. And I'll leave you again with this. I think this is the best illustration that there is of how good Brandon Aiyuk has been relative to other receivers, how efficient he's been. The guys that were picked over him, he did as much damage in way fewer opportunities. And efficiency matters more than raw yardage. All right, everybody, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll go ahead and toss that 25 years later 49ers Packers link into the description. Go ahead and check that out if you want to read some long form 49ers historical content. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Everybody, have a good night.